Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. For those of you who were not here yesterday, my name is Peggy Endress, and I am pleased to be your MC throughout the remainder of this conference. Our final panel is the recommissioning panel, moderated by Steve Hawkins. Steve has spent his professional career in sales and marketing, developing an international organization serving major North American corporations. Apart from his professional career, he has helped foster Friends of Dorothy Day, providing food and friendship nightly to residents rebuilding their lives at Catholic Charities Higher Ground in St. Paul. Steve was on the TCPM board at its inception and remains active in Twin Cities Prison Ministry on the Finance Committee and in supervising the Order of Malta, Twin Cities Prison Ministry Pen Pal program. In addition, he has helped organize a nationwide Pen Pal program serving brothers and sisters behind bars. In 2010, Steve dedicated his life to serving the poor and the sick as a member of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem of Rhodes and of Malta. Please welcome Steve, who will introduce our panel.
I'd like to take a minute to thank Peg for what she's done. She has kept us on track and engaged with the mission that we've all come here to take part in. I don't know if I'm like you or not, but I tend to use my hand for messages. And at the end of our last session, the healing session, our music group sang repeatedly these words, and they've stuck in my mind ever since. Overwhelmed by your presence, Lord. Overwhelmed by your presence. I can truly say that in the past 24 hours being here has been an overwhelming experience for me, in large part because of you and your participation. Our panel this afternoon, as Peg indicated, will address recommissioning. We've had two panels thus far. One was forgiveness, and last night's was healing. And our third is recommissioning. What is recommissioning? Recommissioning is that act that you and I perform on behalf of Jesus Christ, taking what he's giving us in the forgiving and healing process and putting it to work for our brothers and sisters. So as we went through yesterday's afternoon session with forgiving, Carrie and Tricia and Tim told us their stories and how forgiveness played an essential part in their reintegrating back into our communities and changing their lives. Last night, as Nate and Dick and Jay spoke to us about their stories, they emphasized the importance that healing played in their lives. And today we'll hear from Marlon and Rob, their stories and how they have been able to put their forgiveness and their healing to work in service for others. Yesterday I started out in the conference listening to stories, and at least initially thinking of them being someone else's story, someone else's experience of forgiveness or healing. And then late last night it dawned on me that while I listened to the stories of others and how they were healed or how they were forgiven, I was remembering my story. And I was remembering how I was forgiven and how I was healed. So I'd ask you today that as we listen to Marlon and to Rob and their stories, let's put ourselves in those positions. Our stories may be slightly different, but we too are called to acknowledge the forgiveness we've been given and the healing we've been forgiven, and today to consider our next call, commissioning. I must point out, just as we begin, that unfortunately Pastor John Turnipseed, who was to be on our panel today, took ill and is in the hospital. So he won't be with us. I'd ask that you keep him and his family in your prayers. I don't know what the state of his illness is at the moment, but please do keep him in your prayers. Our first panelist will be Marlon. Marlon's a person living with long-term recovery from SUD. He credits his recovery to his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. During his years of struggle, he served over 10 years in various Minnesota correctional facilities. Today, he's program manager for a large reentry and recovery ministry in North Minneapolis. One of his many interests is criminal justice reform and advocacy. Marlon, will you please share your story with us?
I will. I'm Marlon. I struggled with methamphetamine and alcohol addiction for over 20 years of my life. I always like to start my story by saying that enabled me to achieve many things in life. A lot of degrees, mostly fifth degrees, a second degree, and a first degree. I lived in some of the most secure gated communities in the state. During that time, I learned a lot. The last time I went in with a different mindset. I'd gone to Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, hoping not to have to go back to prison again, but I did. And I just went in there with a completely different mindset the last time, and determined within myself that I was going to leave there a different person than what I went in, and improved person. And so I grew up in Dakota County. I grew up in South St. Paul mostly. Was born in Oklahoma, but my family moved back to Minnesota, where they were from, when I was about 5 years old. My earliest memories, if people were having fun, they had alcohol in their hand. I immediately associated fun with consumption of alcohol. It's just what I thought. Another thing that was strange to me when we moved to Minnesota, back to Minnesota, and I had some friends up here, I went to my friend's house and we had supper, and after supper I went to my buddy's room to play, and I had to ask him, who's your dad's girlfriend? Because in my household, my dad was married to my mom, but then there was always a girlfriend and my uncles, and it was just what it was. And I remember that striking me as odd when he said, my dad don't have a girlfriend, and so needless to say, my life growing up, I had a lot of mixed messages. My dad always loved me, he cared about me. Some people's stories are a little bit different. They have a dad that's like bad across the board. I had a dad that taught me a lot of negative things, but he also never ended a conversation with me up until the day he died that didn't end with "I love you," and and an encouragement in some level. And so very confusing, because eventually I grew to understand the pain that he put my mother through, the pain that my dad fought a lot, and so I associated being a man with sleeping around a lot, being able to maintain myself physically against, being able to physically fight, and absolutely no respect for authority except for my dad. I think I was in third grade or something, and we had a new house. My dad owned several semis at that time. He was successful in business. And there was a cop that was driving through town, and he had his window down, and I pedaled my bike up to him as quick as I could and called him an effing pig. And so he kind of pulled me over, directed me back to my house where my dad happened to be home, walked up to the door, knocked on the door, said, "Mr. Mazzaras, your son just called me this." And my dad looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Well, get a respectable job then." And so that was my childhood. That was what no respect for authority at all. And yet there's these mixed things of my dad, I looked up to him. I don't know, all that to go on. My first experience with learning who the Lord was when I was like 13 years old. I had my two best friends were twin brothers, and their mom got like radically saved by Jesus Christ. And if I wanted to hang out with them, we were going to be going to church. And so that was where I first got introduced to the Lord and accepted Christ into my life. It didn't change much at that time, other than I had an experience where I understood that he was real and he was alive. My parents were divorcing by then, and so my life went a completely different direction for a long time. By the time I was 21 years old, I had been married and divorced and had two kids. I was a chronic alcoholic, renting a room from my uncle, because we weren't fully divorced, we were separated. My alcoholism was at a state where people didn't want me around. The only person I had to drink with was my uncle at that time. And my uncle would talk about how he was going to end his life. And I was always told that if somebody's going to talk about something like that, it doesn't mean they're serious. It means they're not serious about it, right? And that's what I believed until May 1st of 1995, when I got a call that from my grandmother, actually. My grandmother, it was a duplex. She lived upstairs, and she couldn't get into the downstairs, and my Uncle Mike, she couldn't make any contact with him, and I happened to be away the night before. Long story short, I could hear music playing in the garage, and it was, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Johnny Cash, A Boy Named Sue, but it was playing real slow because my uncle had a radio set up in there that was connected to a car battery, and the car battery was draining, and it was a cassette tape in there. And so it was A Boy Named Sue playing real drug out and slow. I could hear that playing in there. Both doors were locked. I took apart the handle on the roll-up garage door, rolled up the garage door to find my uncle hanging from the rafters. And that was right around when I really started discovering what methamphetamine was. I truly believed at that time, because it alleviated my alcoholism, that it was like a gift from God. I had no idea what post-traumatic stress was or anything like that. I knew that if I did methamphetamine long enough, it did two things. It kept my emotions so numb that I didn't experience pain. And when I finally slept, I didn't have nightmares about that image. He'd been in there about 12 hours, and it was a warm 1st of May. And so what that does to it's not a pleasant sight to see, to have that image of somebody that you care about etched into your brain, you know. And so I believed that. I just thought, this drug is amazing. But it wasn't long before felony charges start coming from possession and different stuff. The other thing it did too was the making of a drug dealer. I found somebody that if I pooled money together, I could get a better deal on drugs. So I would get money together from other people and go see this person and, get more drugs for that amount of money. Well, eventually this person says, "Hey, you're coming to see me pretty often. Like, why don't you just take this and go with you and take it with you and then bring me back the money later?" Voila, I'm a drug dealer, right? There was no criminal mastermind thing behind any of it. It was just a matter of circumstance, really. But I did realize, I'm good at this, and I also realized that, people did want me around because I had something that they they wanted, right? And so it filled that void inside that alcohol had really taken from me, because nobody wanted me around, and suddenly everybody wanted me around, and I was able to have like extra money to give away, and I somehow played that into an image that I was some sort of good person because of being able to help people, you know. And at the end, I've realized like I was a snake oil salesman, right? I was selling poison to sick people and making myself feel good in the process because I thought I was doing them some sort of service. So that leads to over 10 years of incarceration. I think it's 11 or 12 fifth-degree drug possessions, a second-degree drug possession, a first-degree drug possession, 2 felony fleeings, and a receiving stolen property. In 2014, I got in a high-speed chase on a stolen motorcycle, leaving Hinckley Casino. And during that chase, I had charges pending. Life wasn't looking good for me, and I really seriously considered just running right into a bridge at 120 miles an hour on a motorcycle. I realized during that time I didn't have the courage to do it, and so there was a piece of me that, I'm so joyful today that I didn't have that courage, but at the time it just deteriorated even more of me, of like how worthless I really truly was. My last 4 years of using, I had a little period of sobriety, about 3 years, and got mad at God and turned back to that life. And for the first couple of years, it was okay. The scriptures are true when it says if you leave that door cracked open after you clean it out, that everything comes back, you know, stronger and more powerful. Because prior to that, I had ounces of dope and thousands of dollars. Suddenly, I have tens of thousands of dollars, and I have pounds of dope at my access, and girls and motorcycles and just everything that goes along to feeding the flesh, right? It was all there, and it was fun for a little while. There was the last 2 years of it, I was miserable. I was miserable every time I stuck a needle in my arm. I was miserable when I looked in the mirror. I was miserable about the people that were surrounding me and looking up to me like I was some kind of somebody, right? Because I knew by then that like what I was doing was gross, really. So by the time I got sentenced to prison, I got into prison, and I realized quickly that I felt freer in there than I had my entire life, especially the last 2 years of my use. And Tim, you would know, we've had conversations in there working as clerks in the Prison Fellowship Academy. I was at the point where I don't want to say content with being in prison, but I was content with who I was in there, because I felt freer than I did through all them years of bondage and addiction. By the grace of God, so I was sentenced to 135 months by the grace of God and the work of some people advocating for me, and Mr. Ron Solheide, who I thought was going to be here today, signing off on me on an early release program that I was promised by my case manager I would not get because of my history and the amount of time that I had. I was able to get released from prison 50 months early. Just last June, I went in front of the Board of Pardons. I got my sentence commuted from 135 months to 92 months, and so today I'm completely off paper, and able to work with people on a daily basis to share my strength and hope and my struggles, to help navigate their life. I tell, there's a church message that I listened to about 2 months ago, and about the only thing that stuck out to me was one part of the message where it said, your act of obedience can directly affect somebody else's destiny, right? Thursday night, we have a service at Freedom Works, and the speaker that came in, he's also a musician and associate pastor of a church. I used to sell drugs to him 17, 20 years ago. He was part of a rock band that I was a part of the circle of people that kept their drug addiction and all that fueled up so they could do the things that they were doing. He got sober about 16 years ago. He was the first person that when I said, if Mike Ball can get sober and live for Jesus, I have hope. He was the first person. The second person was Gina Evans, who, we did a lot of crime together, a lot of different, and lo and behold, she got sober. And it gave me another piece of hope. That was a few years later. And so between the two of them, those individuals, like, that's where the seeds got planted, right? Because I was watching. And so Thursday night, Mike's there, he's playing music. He's got one of his old band members is in our program now, right? And they're playing music together again, and it's the first time they've done that in 20-some years. I could look out across the room and see my niece's eyes looking up at me, who my wife and I prayed into Metro Hope Ministries last October. She was a 20-plus year heroin addict, opiate addict, was in jail down in Florida, and my half-sister, her mom, told her, if Marlon can do it, you can do it. And then I look back a little further, and there's my older brother, who's also in our program now, who's a year and a half sober, looking up at me and realizing that, like, because he's seen me do it, eventually he realized he could do it, And so that's the power of obedience. That's what I'm going to share for now, and you can introduce Rob. Thank you for listening.
Marlon, I'm most grateful for your story. Tell me, if you could, since you've been out, what is it that Christ is calling you to do?
I guess the short answer is to continue to be obedient to the direction that he's put me in. He continues to open doors for me, and then encourages me to have the will to step into them, the courage to step into them. There's a whole long testimony that goes along with that has to do with the rec retreat in 2015. I would share it some other time. It would be a whole nother story that's involved in it. But I'll tell you, the end result of that is the fact that there was a verse that was spoke over me at that retreat, and a person prophesied over me that I would have favor with the chief jailer. And I can tell you today, the Commissioner of Corrections sits right there, and I can text message him. Just last night I said, hey, are you going to be speaking in person or over Zoom? And I got a reply quickly back. And so it really is what it is. I mean, I'm called to serve people coming behind me and show them that there's a hope and a path forward, but really just to be obedient and make the courage to step into the doors that he opens for me, and don't mess around with the doors that are closed. So.
Marlon, thank you very much. At the end of our panel, we will entertain questions for either Marlon or Rob. So if you have any or think of any, please write them down, and we'll get to them in just a little while. Our next panelist on recommissioning is Rob. Rob's a Christian and native, husband, grandfather, and he's employed as a carpenter and home builder for Habitat for Humanity here in the Twin Cities. For over 15 years, he's been going to Lino Lakes with a team monthly to provide Sunday services. He's on the board of directors of REC, Residents Encountering Christ, and REC has a booth here today if you're interested in learning more after our presentations. REC puts on annual 3-day retreats at 3 prisons, as well as monthly follow-up meetings in each of those prisons. Rob has served in many areas of outreach, such as Sunday school at inner city projects, street-level evangelism, and the Salvation Army Adult Rehabilitation Center with his wife. Please welcome Rob.
Yeah, hi. So I listened last night. My wife and I watched the live feed of the last panel last evening. And one of the themes that I saw was that some people had really tough upbringings. I can't use that as an excuse because I had good parents. My mom and dad were both there when I was growing up, and I think I was my mom's favorite out of 4 kids. My dad used to take me fishing all the time, and they took us to church. My dad, both my parents were Catholic, so I can't blame my family, but when I was just turning a juvenile delinquent, I chose to hang out with a bunch of wild Indians. I lived on an Indian reservation, and I was seeking excitement. I guess I started out just marijuana, a little bit of acid once in a while. I never wanted to try anything too hard or crazy, but I like chasing girls and like to party. And some of the consequences of these choices that I made were that fights were pretty common. Even in my own family, my cousins and stuff, we would just go in the backyard and duke it out for the fun of it. Had a lot of pretty shallow relationships. When I went away to boarding school, met a girl from South Dakota, and she was a party girl. I thought it was fun for a while, but after we had a son together, she wanted to keep on partying, so that resulted in loss of trust and a broken heart. And after things just kept getting worse and worse with her, there was a lot of resentment and anger. You know, I built up these walls, and I became, I don't know, I wandered for a long time. I left her, and I wandered the country for a while, and I just was sort of aimless. Got into all kinds of drugs. I was living in Chicago for a while, got mixed up in some gang stuff. I wasn't in the gang, but I knew some people who were. And I'd come back and forth, and in 89, because of all this anger and resentment that I had, I got caught up in something that I would just call street justice, and ended up in Hennepin County Jail looking at a potential life sentence. My girlfriend, she went and saw a medicine man, and he told her that I needed to make peace with God. So to me, I thought back to a couple years earlier when I was homeless, and in Los Angeles some guy was on a street corner trying to tell me about Jesus, and I wasn't really interested because I was looking for a job, looking for any way to make money. And he says, we're going to have a chicken dinner after the church service. I said, well, where's your church? What are we waiting for? So I went to his church, and that's when the first time I heard the gospel, and the first time I had this encounter with God. I mean, I went to church and I always believed in God when I was a kid, but this time it was like the Holy Spirit just did something. I guess you can call it a born-again experience. So when I was in that county jail, I thought about peace with God. To me meant the God of the Bible. So I got a Bible and I started reading it. And I spent 10 months in county jail before I was sentenced. I got offered a plea bargain to 13 and a half years, which is way better than life. So I took it, and I got sent to Oak Park Heights. Was there for just only supposed to spend a year there, but I liked it so much I asked if I could stay longer, and they let me stay a couple more years. See, it was quieter than Stillwater, the air conditioning, and I don't know, it was just a lot more calm. I thought I was in the honor unit, and I was running with the Native brothers at the time until they found out that I was a Christian. And then they sent someone to ask me a bunch of questions about, it was more like trying to trap me. basically they kicked me out of the group for being a threat to the security of the group. So I caught up with the chief one time. He was walking around the yard, and I told him that I came in here alone and I'm going to leave alone. I said, it's too bad you can't accept me for who I am, but I am a Christian. I'm also a native. I've always been a native, so I guess that's just how it's going to be. Eventually I got transferred to Stillwater because I was in the honor unit and I was doing all these positive things in Oak Park and Stillwater. Right away I started getting involved in some positive things. They offered to transfer me down to medium security, so I went to Lino Lakes and was there for 3 years, and that's where I first met. I was working for the newspaper in Lino Lakes as editor. I went in to cover a story about the very first Residents Encounter Christ retreat. So I also went through as a participant. I really was impacted by this ministry. I was a Christian too, so to see all these people that were coming in and the love that they had, I guess, because I had these walls up and I had been a believer for a while, I started to allow God to touch my heart, to soften my heart. I was open at the time, and I really was drawn to the people in this ministry. So I went through it and I really liked it. I did a really good piece for the rec ministry that first time. I went back and I helped on the second one and the third one, and then I was transferred to minimum security, went to work release, eventually got out in '98, so that's 24 years now. I've been out almost 25, which makes me old. And so I started going back in. I knew I would go back into prison as a volunteer, because when I was in, I was serving God through most of the time I was inside, and I was leading people to the Lord. I'd get up every morning and ask God to help me to share the gospel with at least one person, and I led a lot of people to the Lord while I was in there. So I knew when I got out I wanted to do prison ministry from the outside, and I first approached one ministry, and they said, why don't you wait for a while? And this was after I had been out 6.5 years. They said, why don't you wait for a while? Another ministry said, wait a couple more years. And then Barb got a hold of me and she said, why don't you come in with us? So maybe those doors closed so that I could go in with rec. And so I started doing that. It's been probably 18 years since I've been going in with rec. So let's see. I mentioned I served 9 years. When I was, Steve mentioned some of the stuff that I've been involved with since I got out. So I've been involved with the rec ministry primarily, and probably for the last 10 years or so, I've been on the board of directors with them. I also have been going in with another ministry that my wife has been a part of, Hosanna Lutheran Church. We do a Sunday service once a month at Lino Lakes, and I led the service last Sunday. So I get to stand up in front of a congregation of prisoners and share the gospel. If you had told me I would be doing that 30 years ago, I would never have believed you. So one of the questions that Tom Lundquist gave us was, who are the people that impacted you in your life? I would say the first person is my father. There was another guy who was in Oak Park Heights with me, Riley Willunga. He's a lifer. He had already served almost 20 years at the time. He's still serving time. He's in Alaska now. He's a native from Alaska. Earl Gilchrist, he was in Complex 7, and whenever I had questions, I was a baby Christian, I was reading the Bible, and I'd go down to his cell and knock on the door, ask him, and he would just answer my question. So he basically discipled me. Now he's a bishop, 2 churches in Minneapolis, or one in Minneapolis, one in St. Paul. There were people throughout the prison system, like just for instance, there was a librarian who was really helpful. She was my boss for a while. I worked in a library. My wife, of course, I call her the church lady, and she wasn't really in my plans, but God knew that I needed all the help that I could get. So I say He gave me my own personal angel. There was a guy who joined the Amicus program called Steve Gottschalk. Amicus is not a Christian ministry, but he came in and he's been real instrumental in helping me get the job that I have now for Habitat for Humanity. I've been with them for 15 years. Chaplains Dave Berg, Marshall Hallman, Barb Skillings, and the whole Rec family. And my pastors from church, I go to North Heights Lutheran Church, Pastor Eric Bloom and Bob Cottingham, all the brothers and sisters. So, it's just hasn't been something that I've tried to do on my own. There's a lot of people that I've reached out to that have helped me throughout this walk with God.
Rob, thank you. Rob, you brought up REC as being a change agent for you. Yesterday we heard from Carrie and Tricia, and they both had experienced the Charis ministry, similar situation. What is it about REC that changed your outlook, your objective, that essentially got you where you are today?
Yeah, like I mentioned at the time, I was going through a healing process, and it allowed me to be really open to other people, other brothers and sisters who were coming in and helping out. And also, I was sort of like I'm Native, so it wouldn't be Lone Ranger Christian, it'd be more like a Tonto Christian. I was more like doing it on my own, and then when I got involved with REC, I saw that I could join a team of people who are all with the same mission and accomplish more, because with REC, we can invite like 100 men at a time instead of, just doing one-on-one. And now that I'm out and I'm able to help out, there's things that I can do for instance, giving a talk that helps me get into the Bible and prepare and think about others, about what I'm going to share with other people, rather than just thinking about myself doing my own thing.
Thank you. So many of us sitting here today wonder what it is that we are called to do in answering Christ's call in Matthew 25, visit the prisoner. In your experience, what might be some of the things that those of us who aren't familiar, who are called to do something, what might we do that might make a difference in the lives of someone on the inside or their families on the outside? Marlon?
I'll relate it to my first REC retreat, which was in 1998. So I did my first one the year you were getting out. And I thought it was 13 for a long time, but it was actually number 10. And so that experience, the amount of people that came in to show love to us, what I seen myself at the time, low-life criminal, changed my heart. And I think it was actually 3 days. We did a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday that back then. And the experience was so transformative to see the amount of people that came in to actually express love and care and concern for us, and then the experience that they brought itself so there's a part of that, if you're not familiar with it, where you write a bunch of stuff down that is icky on the inside, and then they remove it from you, and without giving away too many secrets, I realized in that moment that I had all this stuff that I didn't want, but I had a difficult time letting go of it. And I left that weekend lighter than I'd ever been in my life, and I would love to say that, obviously that changed everything from that point forward. No, it didn't. I spent another 9 years in prison after that, but it was a experience that just another seed that was planted, right? And so you guys all have the ability to go in and show people that they have value, that they have worth, and that's exactly what happens. Like we get to finally understand that, oh, we're made in the image of Christ as well as you are. And so to think that, well, how would I relate? Well, one of the things that I used to struggle with in like treatment or something, if I had a counselor that didn't have a history, I thought, well, you can't relate to me. But I've learned over time that I can learn something from somebody that has been able to navigate life and not make the same mistakes and poor choices that I have, because life is life for everybody and we all have struggles. And to be able to receive something from somebody that was able to get through all the similar stuff and not make the poor choices that I did, there's a lot of value in that as well, and so that's just one of the ways, I guess.
Yeah, God is good. And all the time. So I look at how Jesus spent his life. I look at Paul, and he had a purpose, a mission. Now I can't do full-time ministry. I have to work to pay bills, but I can volunteer. I can do whatever I can, and I think God is still happy with that. Now, I would encourage anybody who is interested that to get involved, who's never been involved, that there are a lot of hurting guys in prison that appreciate people taking the time to go in and see them, to get a letter, a card. So you guys make a difference. And whoever is going in and reaching out to the men inside, women too. So, yeah, God bless you.
Thank you very much. I said we were going to open it up to questions. Do we have questions from anyone for either Marlon or Rob this morning? Anybody? Okay. Well, I'd like to thank both Rob and Marlon for their participation this morning and sharing with us not only their stories, but how they continue to make a difference in their lives for those currently behind bars. So, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before we meet our final presenter, I'm going to ask you to take 10, 15 minutes, come back in, and we'll meet our final speaker. All right, welcome back, everyone. Our final speaker is a person who some call the chief jailer. And he appears to be known, or at least everyone has heard of him. Please welcome Paul Schnell, Commissioner of Department of Corrections.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I just want to start out by just first of all saying one thing. You people are amazing. The fact that you are sitting in here on a Saturday afternoon when it is like that out there, it says something about you, and I'm not sure what it says, but but I also got to say, I think it's also heartening. It's incredibly heartening to see a group of people coming together on a Friday and on a Saturday to talk about prisons and people that are in this system. And it's particularly, I think, significant when you look at what's happening today, right now, the conversations in our communities about crime and the fear of crime and what all of that stuff means can oftentimes be an incredibly false dichotomy. And what do I mean by that? I mean that should we be concerned about the things that are happening in our community, the things that are affecting safety? Absolutely we should. And we have to lift that up. We have to hold up the fact that there are some folks that are engaged in things for a host of reasons that are harmful and are contrary to our community standards. And at the same time, I think we can, and I think you, by the virtue of the fact that you're sitting here, can also give voice to the fact that there are real people that are oftentimes affected by some of the crimes for people that are in our system. And we have to be mindful and think about the people, these folks who are victimized. We have to recognize the fact that our neighbors are oftentimes in fear. And we have to, and I think the fact that you are here illustrates the sense that there is an inherent value in all human beings, regardless of what they may have done. And despite the fact that in church communities, faith communities across our globe, really, hear about the importance of focusing on that value, lifting up the value of human beings, and seeing people for more than the worst thing they've ever done. The reality is that for many people, there is a level of growing comfort that comes when they can sit in these pews on Sunday and hear that message of forgiveness and the opportunity for redemption and walk outside and forget that is what we're all called to do. And I think that's why I'm so impressed. As I was listening to our panelists on the last session, I was struck by the fact that incredible people and incredible experiences and stories that are not often told or understood. And I think you all, as people who are committed to this type of ministry, can tell stories and lift up this reality in ways that right now in particular, our world needs. And I'm not even talking about the dynamics of politics. I mean, you watch TV in the evenings now, and for the next 2.5 weeks, it's going to be nothing but a lot of these messages, a lot of the stuff around crime. And again, we can be concerned about that. But we also have to be concerned about the other things. Last Sunday, I had a chance to go over to St. Peter Claver and with their social justice folks. And I talked there about a guy that I had a chance to meet, John Braithwaite. And some of you may be familiar with him, but John Braithwaite is an Australian criminologist. And John Braithwaite, instead of asking the traditional criminological question, why do people engage in wrongdoing? John Braithwaite instead flipped that question and said, why is it that most of us do the right thing most of the time? Why do most of us do the right thing most of the time? And what John Braithwaite did, and he's a social scientist, he looked at tribal and Aboriginal communities, and he saw in them, well, you could just look at what is the most profound and severe form of punishment in tribal communities. It was banishment, wasn't it? And so what Braithwaite said was, ultimately, why do most of us do the right thing most of the time? It's not because of the punishment that we may be exposed to. It is because of our desire to maintain connection with other people. And I think about this myself so often, why I am where I am. And, you had asked that question. I was hearing people talking about who are those folks that made a difference in your life? Who are the people that impacted you? And when I think about that, it is connection. It was that connection that really allows me to stand here today. It was people who saw in me oftentimes more than I saw in myself. Who, despite the worst things I've ever done and the poor decisions that I made along the way, also saw something else. And I think that's the lived experience that most of us have. And yet, it can be very hard for many people to live that out. Braithwaite went on and he looked at this whole notion of the desire for connection. And he said and he saw that if you look at societies or groups that have a strong cultural dimension, and I'm going to make this clear here, a cultural dimension of shame, are likely to have lower rates of crime and wrongdoing. And I know that when we hear the word shame, that in our culture, in our society, shame oftentimes has a highly and pronounced sense of negativity, and certainly it can be. The worst form of shame is that sense of, I am what I did, right? That's the most negative form of shame. But what Braithwaite is talking about is when he uses this sense of cultural or communitarian sense of shame. That shame, when we experience shame, it's and many people believe it's one of the most natural, it's one of we're biologically kind of have a level of innate affect, it's oftentimes referred to. And when we experience shame, shame is experienced in a cultural sense when I get that sense that there is a disconnection between me and others. That is the moment when I experience a sense of shame. And that when we're healthy, when we're at our healthiest, and that occurs, I get that sense, something happened here. And I feel that sense of disconnection. When we're at our healthiest, we connect, we get closer. And that's what you all do. That despite the hard things that people have done that put them into prison or into the criminal justice system, you get closer. And that's really the healing side of this sense of shame, the importance of communitarian shame that Braithwaite was talking about. The opportunity to have that sense of opportunity to reconnect. What was the word? I think you were just talking about reclaiming. And I find I think about this so often because I oftentimes look at the people who are involved or get themselves caught up in the system. And ultimately what Braithwaite says in his whole hypothesis was grounded in this sense that where individual wrongdoers are confronted or shamed, within a communitarian continuum of respect and support, the process of reintegration can occur. So that's a lot of words. But the essence of it is this. All of us can think about many times when we didn't get what we wanted. We can think about the fact that we didn't get what we wanted, but because we were treated well, we could live with that outcome. It's that sense of connection, that sense of communitarian, I'm doing something to go along, even though it's not something that I necessarily wanted, because I was treated decently and with a level of respect. And so this whole notion of shame, that's that sense of confrontation, and this is one of the things I think that prison ministry and people who do what you all are involved in do, is that you don't cause people to feel shame. What you do is you teach and you show up and you get close despite the fact that there is this sense of disconnection that has occurred. A level of separation has occurred. Don Nathanson, I'm going to talk a little bit about Don Nathanson. He's a Philadelphia psychiatrist. He died just a few years ago. Prolific writer. Don Nathanson was big into this whole notion of script theory and the fact that we all have scripts that patterns that we fall into, and I really like a lot of his theories, and he wrote a lot about shame. And he talked about and he identified what he called the compass of shame. And the compass of shame, and I'm just going to describe it. It just had the four poles of north, south, east, west, and in the center of the compass, that was that place where when the spotlight of shame was cast upon us, and this is something that all of us can probably think about, and you can remember that time. Have you ever said anything, and the minute you said it, you could look at that other person and you go, shouldn't have said that, right? It wasn't what you intended. It was just something that happened. Now, what Nathanson said is that as human beings, there are really 5 basic ways that we're going to respond to that instant. 5 simple, basic ways. And I'm going to argue that the 5th one I'm going to talk about is what prison ministry does. The first one that Braithwaite said, Don Nathanson said we could do, is we can move to attack self. And this is oftentimes something that plays in our own minds. Well, I'm just no good, I'm worthless, I cannot communicate, I can't get my points across, I'm just not good at connecting with other people. So it's this attack self. What did we just do? It does not address what just happened between us. It didn't address that sense of, shouldn't have done that. So attack self. It allows me to maintain this disconnection from other people. Or, on the other side of that pole, the notion of attack other. So when I experience this, instead of going to the center of the compass where the spotlight casts its attention, I say, he deserved it. He deserved what he got. I said what I said, and he deserved it. Allowing us again not to go to the center of that compass where the problem really exists. The other thing that can happen, the third option, is this notion of withdrawal. And withdrawal is simply that sense of I'm going to disconnect, I'm going to stay away from, I'm going to isolate, I'm going to hide, because the more I am around that person, it forces me to look at where the spotlight is casting its attention. So, attack self, attack other, withdrawal. And the last one is avoidance. And people say, I don't get it, because withdrawal and avoidance are really the same thing. The difference for Nathanson said was that avoidance was the use of something else to keep you from going to the center of the compass where the spotlight is casting its attention. And oftentimes, this is the place where people address like histories of pain and all those types of things with the use of something else. It could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be food, it could be sex, it could be any number of things that we can use. It could be our phones. It could be things that we get to that can be unhealthy, that keep us from going to that center where the spotlight casts its attention. And the fifth place in the compass is the center. And that is moving close to the place or the space where the spotlight casts its attention. And that means we get closest to the thing that causes us to feel disconnection. And that's what I think you who do prison ministry and work with folks in the criminal justice system do. You do that and allow the people that are in the system, and frankly, you live your lives in ways that model going to the center of the compass, which I think is really what we're called to do. That's where we're called to be our most human, to create that sense of connection. And the people in the system are fortunate to have folks like all of you who are willing to do that, who are willing to connect and willing to understand what they're going through. And it's so fascinating for me because I think about this compass, and I think about the way, because it's just as real and alive in my own life as it is, and when I meet with people who come before me for parole from a life sentence. That one of the things, what is it that you look for when I sit in those hearings, the life sentence hearing, the parole hearings, is ultimately I look for that sense of that a level of ease, or at least a willingness to go to the center of the compass where the spotlight casts its attention. Because that's where we're healthiest. And that's what you provide through your ministry. And for that, I am really grateful to all of you. I just wanted to start out by, it was a little theoretical, but I wanted to talk a little bit about where we're going and then hopefully wrap up a little bit with the things that I'm hoping that where you could be of help to us. And go from there. First of all, one of the things I just want to talk a little bit about in terms of Minnesota is, Minnesota, while I would argue, and probably all of us, we lock up still a lot of people in our state. We have the fourth lowest incarceration rate in the state, in the United States. We are among the top when it comes to community supervision. And one of the things that I think while we have a lot of work to do in terms of making it easier for faith communities to connect with people inside our prisons and jails across the state, we also need to find ways, and I don't know the answer to all of this, we need to find ways to connect with people that are in the system that aren't in prison, but that are in correctional supervision, that do feel that sense of separation in the broadest sense. And so as a system and as people who are committed to a ministry of trying to serve people, thinking about the ways that we can invite people who have been involved and are involved in the criminal justice system but not imprisoned, to find a sense of connection. Because that's what John Braithwaite says it's all about, right? At the end of the day, it's that sense of connection with other people who struggle. I mean, that's what church is about. We sit among and with other people like us who are human beings who are trying to find our way. And ultimately, I think we need to think about that. Today, we sit with about 7,600 people in our prisons. We're a couple thousand down from prior to COVID. But we are swiftly on our way back up. The numbers are growing quickly. 100,000 people in Minnesota are on some level of correctional supervision. About 7,500 people are on supervised release. So they're not on probation, but they're released from prison and are in that 1/3 of their sentence that they serve on supervision. And so these are places where, when we think about these opportunities, and I think about, I will tell you, there was a couple of things they didn't tell me when the governor asked me if I would serve as the Commissioner of Corrections. One, he didn't tell me that I would be the person that have to make parole decisions for life sentence people. And number two, he didn't tell me that we were going to have a pandemic. Because I got to tell you that I think about all of the ways that has impacted us. And created levels of disconnection that we are committed to working our way through. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But when we think about why these connections become important, I mean, the reality is that the research tells us that about 60% of all crime is committed by people who have reoffended. And so if we want to make sure that we are doing all we can to make our community safer, and this is the doing multiple things at the same time, we want our communities to be safer, we also have to connect with people who are in the system because we know that that's what's going to make a difference. And yet oftentimes these are the folks that keep us disconnected. So, and we also know that incarceration itself is a profound criminogenic factor. In other words, simply being incarcerated increases the likelihood of reoffending. And so that's one of the reasons why in Minnesota we've invested so heavily on supervision. And we talk about the importance of stories, the stories that we heard just before, and how incredible those lived experiences are. The reality of the news and the reality of our political ads, and I'm not saying this, I'm not being political here about party, because it doesn't matter which party. When you look at the rhetoric of the political ads, the reality is that no one is saying, mentioning that 70% of the people who enter the system never will come back again. Nobody ever says that. Nobody tells those stories. We instead hear repeat offenders doing violent crime and harming everyone in our way. Does that happen? Yes, it does. But it is not the whole story, and it's far from the reality when you look at the numbers. And these are the things that we can do to help, I think, our neighbors understand there are real problems and challenges that we have to address. But we also have to recognize that being more closely connected with people is what is going to reduce the risk of reoffending. And the bottom line is 95% of the people that are in our prisons, whether they're in there for a very long time or a very short time, are going to be coming to communities across our state. They're going to be our neighbors. There's just no way around that. And so it only makes good sense that we do all we can, and I say we do all we can to help these folks feel a sense of connection. Just talk quickly about a couple of things that we're working on, and then I'll kind of wrap up a little bit with some of the things that I think we could use your help. Some of you may have heard me talk about this before, but one of the things that we have done is we really wanted to focus on when people come into the system. We have you get a whole bunch of assessments done when you come in. Substance use, mental health, medical, dental, the full shebang. And what was happening was that was great, but it really was just a lot of good data that was collected, but never really brought back in a way that meaningfully came back with that person who came into the system and where they had the chance to say, okay, now what are we going to do? How am I going to use my time while I'm here? And so what we're doing now is we do that robust assessment when people come into the system, the one we've always done. But the difference is that when that's done, we bring that person in, male or female, that woman or that man, and they sit down with a multidisciplinary team, and we talk about all of the things that we heard and learned from them through this assessment. And some of that even has to do with like early childhood traumas, and some of it may have to do with their interest in connecting with faith communities or even tribal practices. I want to connect back to my native practices as well. I mean, it can be all of those different things. And then ultimately what we do with them is we set up an opportunity for them to develop a plan along with staff. And it is the job and the role of staff to help them navigate the system to get where they need to go. And front end load that, because the way it oftentimes has worked, and when you came into prison, what was your initial? It was 150 some months? 130 some? So, what would have happened is that, the last bit of time that Marlon spent in prison, that's when he would have gotten treatment. It would have been right at the end. This happens all the time. And what we're saying now is, look, we need to shift this and say, let's try and look at all these transformational opportunities and then and think about the ways that those transformational opportunities even change the prison setting. Because if you could create a recovery community within the prison system, ultimately, this makes a big difference. It becomes more rehabilitative, and people can be more supportive to one another. Is higher education your thing? Is I need some building trades, I need some mental health supports, or it could be even more basic than that is, look, I want to get my GED, but I have two horrible toothaches. And you can't sit in class if you have two horrible toothaches. So we need to ultimately develop these really kind of robust program plans that is different for every single person. Second, and so we develop that plan and we help them navigate it. Second thing that we want to do is we want to get to this point where that as long as they work that plan, that ultimately we support them by, instead of having them serve today 2/3 of their time in prison, 67%, they could walk out at 50%. So I'll use an example. I end up with, Marlon and I each end up the same day walking into prison with a 100-month sentence. Meaning we have to serve 67 months, 33 months on supervision. In this case, Marlon does the program. He does well. He works his plan. He navigates it. He problem solves. He works with the staff. And ultimately, he gets through, and he comes up on that 50 months, and we say, Marlon, you know what? We're gonna move you now out to your period of supervised release, your supervision term. What normally would be 33 months. Paul, because you came in and instead of doing what you could have done, you didn't, and maybe for a lot of reasons, maybe I wasn't ready, it could be whatever. Paul, you're gonna be doing your 67 months. You're gonna stay in for the whole amount of that time. Because today, it doesn't matter that Marlon did well and I didn't do well. We both walk out of prison the same day. It makes no sense to me that what ends up happening is that despite the fact that Marlon's risk, because he did treatment, he connected with rec, he connected with amicus volunteers, whatever it was, he did all these things to reduce his risk and address some of his needs, and he still sits in prison for the same amount of time I do. And I'm not invested in any of that at this stage of the game. And what we know is that incentive matters to human beings. Incentives matter. And so if we can incentivize that opportunity so that Marlon can realize a benefit from that, that ultimately is good. Now, in this case, so Marlon did well. He's out, instead of 67 months, he's out at 50 months. So we've saved 17 months of incarceration time. He goes on to supervised release. Normally, he would have 33 months on supervised release. But because Marlon, when he got out, he continued to do so well, instead of having 33 months, for every 2 months that he does well, we'll take 1 month off the back end. So that instead of 33 months, Marlon could be done with his supervision and done with his sentence largely, for the most part, at the end of 22 months. Me, because I didn't do that, I'm going to stay on supervision for the entire 33 months, and at the end of the day, my entire service for my sentence is going to be 100 months. Marlon's has dropped. He reduced his prison sentence by 17 months, and he reduced his supervision term by 11. 28 months less of system involvement. Now you say, okay, well that's pretty good. That seems like it may mean something. Well, yeah, because that 17 months, and again, this is the business side of it. That 17 months has a value of about $19,300 in cash money that taxpayers are paying for my 17 months, and that they saved on Marlon getting out early. Almost 20 grand was saved because Marlon got out 17 months early because he had done well. And so we started to calculate what this could look like, and said, if we could do this and really build a sense of incentives in our system that ultimately could reduce people's system involvement, and at the same time, and frequently, and ultimately hold people accountable and create opportunities for transformation, this makes good sense. And we believe that we could save somewhere in the vicinity of between $10 and $15 million a year by through these incentives. That's the minimum. And so what we decided to do is this fourth component of what we ended up calling these four components of the Minnesota Rehabilitation and Reinvestment Act, was we take that money that was saved, that savings, we put it in a fund, and at the end of each year, we dole it out in 25% increments. 25% of those dollars go to victims, crime victims. Why? Because one of the things that I see today as the parole authority, on the days that I do life sentence parole hearings, in the mornings I meet with the families of those people who lost a loved one. And in the afternoons I do the parole hearings. And when I sit in the mornings, when I talk to those families who lost a loved one, I will tell you it is heart-wrenching, because it is though that crime, it is as if they are still standing on the steps of the courthouse on the day of sentencing. 27 or 30 years later. Why? Because oftentimes we conflated the punishment, the quote-unquote justice, with the healing for them. And it has nothing to do with the healing for them. And then the men or women who go into the system and have to serve that 30-year life sentence, they ultimately get access to a whole host of transformative healing opportunities, faith-based opportunities, opportunities for connection with other people. And guess what? Those victims, the people who are left behind, they stand on the steps of the courthouse and oftentimes do not have that type of opportunity. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're providing some of these resources ultimately to make sure that there is the opportunity for them to have healing and transformational opportunities, and the need for stronger and deep community connections. Because ultimately I think it changes the outcome as we look at the totality of this. So 25% goes to victim services. 25% goes to support community supervision costs or treatment or things that we need to address in the community. 25% goes to prevention. We want to take 25% of those dollars and say, we're going to invest these across the state to do better prevention work. We need to get upstream so we don't have people coming into the system. And the last 25% of those savings comes back to the taxpayers. It gets returned to the general fund. Now, some people say, well, that doesn't matter much to me, but to many it does, right? That ultimately there's a dividend for believing in people. There's a dividend for making this type of investment and giving this type of incentive. And so we want to be able to do this. So this whole push of this, what we're MRA, Minnesota Rehabilitation Reinvestment Act, you know, we'll see what happens. We would like to bring it up. We've socialized it a little bit the last couple of sessions. Didn't get very far with it. Because it's hard. It's hard, especially when you're talking about an environment like we're in, where there's concern about crime. But I think, you know, one of the ways you can help is you can help by helping your neighbors and people that you know, your spheres of influence, understand that these kinds of investments and these types of opportunities actually are the things that are going to make us safer. These are the things that are going to make a difference in terms of being smart about our response to wrongdoing in our communities. And you can say personally that you know and have heard people and know the stories of people who have made pronounced change. And that's what we're investing in. So this MRA is something that we're hoping comes back, and we don't, you know, we obviously have an election in between, and I'm not here to politic. People will vote how they vote, and whatever that is, and I'm committed that no matter who is in the office, ultimately there's a desire and there will be a need for them to continue a commitment to making sure that we do well in this space. And that we have strong connections with people like all of you to help create these connections. We need to make sure that ultimately when people are in, there is the opportunity to build pro-social connection and support, which is what church is. That's what church is and has always been in many cases. I think about you know, as a kid, I loved going to church, loved it. But I loved it because it was about other people, right? It was about seeing people. And maybe I wasn't there for the right reason at the time and all that kind of stuff, but it was community. It was connection. It was where we got to see people more regularly. That's why I liked school, too. I didn't like it because of everything else, but I did well because I loved going there to be with my friends. But ultimately, I think we're really committed to seeing the growth of some of these things. We are also seeing a big push on education, a massive push on education within the prison system. Probably many of the jails will as too. During President Trump had signed into law the Pell Restoration, which means Pell grants will now be available to people who are incarcerated. And many people say, oh, that's crazy. We're going to, you know, give grants for people who go to college who are in prison. When my kid is racking up student loan debt by the thousands. And but the reality is, this is that long-term proposition of investment in these types of programming makes a huge difference in terms of reducing recidivism, pronounced reduction by as much. We will see a reduction by as much of a third for people who are involved in higher ed. And here's the other thing about that investment. The investment in higher education for people who are incarcerated, 70% of the men and women who are in Minnesota prisons have kids, have families of their own, 70%. The number one most requested program in the Minnesota Department of Corrections, parenting programs. People are surprised by that, but the reality is there are very few people who want to see their kids follow their footsteps that are inside in our prisons. And so they want these programs. And here's what we know, that if a parent is involved in education in the prison, guess what what happens to the educational outcomes of their kids? Improves and improves dramatically. It's all connected. It's all about connection. And that's what we're hoping to see with some of those programs. So I'm going to wrap this up, because I'm the only difference between you and seeing the rest of the sun here for the rest of the day. Is that, where can you help? I'm going to get some really concrete and some bigger. First, encourage people that you know to make a double down around second chance hiring. Now is a time when we have such a great need for workers, and I think there are many programs and ways that are willing to help support people who are transitioning and employers who may be concerned about bringing in a second chance employee. But the opportunities are pronounced, and I will tell you, these folks will be loyal when they're given that chance. We've seen it. We have a number of employers there. So as you talk to people that you know in your spheres of influence, certainly please encourage that. Housing access becomes a big issue, and anything you can do to help think about ways that we can help find places for people to go and be that are safe is a great need across the entire state. Help folks who have been in the system seek expungements of their records. It makes a difference. It's really concrete. You don't have to be an expert in it, but you talk to somebody who's been involved in the system and they've done well. There are clinics. There are the law schools like LAMP at William Mitchell Law School. There's a variety of different organizations out there that will help people seek and apply for expungements of their criminal records, which just can make it a lot easier. This was mentioned, Marlon talked about he sought a commutation. The pardon board is an option. I can't tell you, I get to watch, I'm the secretary to the pardon board in Minnesota. Pardon board is made up of the governor, the chief justice, and the attorney general, and it's a unanimous vote of those three in terms of granting a pardon or commuting a sentence. But I can't tell you what it is, and Marlon lives this, but what it means to those people to have that act of mercy granted them in the pardon process. It is so incredible to see and be a part of. And so I think when we have those people who exemplify these positive stories, to both support them, encourage them to seek pardons, is something that all of us can do. I would also say that what we need to do is tell and retell the stories of redemption and positive change. Because every day there's going to be stories on the news that are not going to be that. And we need to counter that. I mean, and it's not about, again, it's not about either or. It's about both and. Bad, difficult, challenging things are happening, but man, there is some amazing things happening, and people do change. And you are all a part of helping see that and tell that story, and that's critical. And the last thing you can do, and this is the essence of, I think, why you spent a big chunk of your weekend here, goes right back to where I started. Why do most people do the right thing most of the time? Connection, connection, connection. It's community, and community is not a place. Community is a group of people, and all of you who are committed to doing this type of work in prison ministry, you live it, and for that I am grateful, and I wish you only the best, and God bless. Yes. So we have a reentry unit in the Department of Correction. That reentry unit has people who will work with employers. We also are now partnered with DEED, the Department of Employment and Economic Development, and they have people, and and then we have some nonprofits that are also in this space that are really providing job coaching, some of that kind of stuff, just to reduce some of those barriers and to make it, help employers who are taking that first step of dipping their toes in the pond. There are some big employers nationally, Kroger grocery stores, not so much in Minnesota, but Kroger grocery stores, second chance hiring has become central to their vitality and their workforce. And they invested in it big time. And we're seeing some Minnesota companies now who have called us and said, look, we want to start to connect with people while they're on the inside. And we will even do stuff like, one of them is looking to rent a house and then to put 4 people in there and actually provide some housing. And because they have that big of a need for workers, that it's something that they feel like they can invest in it, and it will pay a dividend in the long haul. So, yeah, our reentry unit at DOC can help, and we'd be happy to. Marijuana. Yeah. So the question was, President Biden recently pardoned people with simple possession of marijuana crimes and what impact that had in Minnesota. So we do not have anyone in prison right now today at all for simple marijuana possession alone. There was none. We did it not that long ago. It was there was a substantial criminal history and then a large quantity, but we don't have anybody now. There has been some talk about this in Minnesota. The challenge is that many states the governor has sole control over that, much like the president does. In our state, by it's a constitutional provision, it's not statutory, it is all 3, and it has to be unanimous. And so they would have to take that up, and generally speaking, the process as it's written today, it requires an application for pardon. And so granting it as an act like the president did, where just across the board, is something that they're legally researching right now just to see if could that even be viable. And then that's the first question. The second then is, would everybody vote in favor of that? Is another question. Yeah.
One of the issues for ministry is trying to get access to the presidential program. Now that reduce some announced staffing.
Yes.
Do you have anything optimistic about?
Yeah. So the question really was about that. We had. COVID was one of the barriers to get people getting access to the prison, and now it's staffing. And the answer, yes, I think we do see, we are making progress. So first of all, on the COVID front, I mentioned I would cover this, we are moving to a community standard. This is really heavy focus on test and treat. That's going to be right now what's happening is if we test, we were talking just yesterday with our medical director. Somebody said, well, we don't have not a single positive case up in Moose Lake. And I said, do you think if we were to do a sentinel test everybody in that prison, that we would have 0 cases? And they said, no, we probably have 40 or 50 cases. But because this is what's happening in the community. We have low levels of people who are symptomatic. So many people don't even know that they have it. And so we're now taking an approach of saying, look, we have to start really focusing on management of illness. It's like flu, right? If you get the flu, you manage the flu, and you try and reduce risk of spread and some of those sorts of things. But ultimately, you're focusing on treatment of individuals, because what's happening is we need to and will continue to take COVID seriously, because we have to. But at the same time, when we start to look at the secondary kinds of harms that we're creating or that COVID has created, disconnection, mental health, substance use stuff, it's really troubling and concerning. And so we need to put some balance, and that's why we're taking this approach. On the hiring side, we are seeing our numbers go up. And what I have told the wardens is that they need to develop plans so that we can get to full programming as soon as possible. We also have done a staffing study. We have a staffing study that's going on right now. And the purpose of the staffing study was not to say how many more staff do you need, but to ask the question, could we deploy our staff differently so that we could maximize their use to have more programs without bringing in considerably more staff. We've also closed some units in some of the facilities, simply because if we can close one whole housing unit that normally would take 15 or 16 staff to run on a 24-hour basis, we can put those back into the mix. So we're really looking at all the ways that we can maximize and stabilize programming, and that's volunteer access, faith programs, all of that stuff. And so that's our goal. Some of our facilities are in worse shape than others. And that's going to be here for a little while. We think we're going to be probably, this month we had like 80-some people in an academy, which is the biggest we've had in forever. Now the question is, can we retain them? And that's been the other challenge, is retaining people. Yes?
Thank you for taking your time to do this connection. A question about programming. Is the budget for the program prisoners in store? No outside management. And it would be an idea, realistic, that the 10 million for the programming be part of that?
Yeah, so programming, we actually think that if we were to, one of the things with programming that we see right now, and Marlon, some of the folks who've been inside here know, our programming is concentrated, generally a lot of it Monday through Friday, a lot of it more on the day shift hours. We get into some evenings, but not as much. And when we look at that, if we started to just, what's the number of hours that we can do programming? We leave Saturdays, almost nothing happens. Visiting may happen. And Sundays, almost nothing happens in those evenings. If we're going to do something and we want to really, if access to pro-social kind of activities, and that includes volunteers who are coming in from the outside, is part of the solution, we need to figure out how do we maximize the use of our time and our space. So how do we get volunteers to come in on Saturday afternoons or Sunday afternoons or Sunday evening, as opposed to those times we're traditionally off the table. And so part of this is really looking at the redeployment of our staff. And we actually think that if we could just get to fuller staffing, and then look at how we use the available time and space, we could offer about 30% more programming than we were prior to COVID by just using that time. A full third more programming time by using and maximizing those hours. And so that's really the goal, because we know that we're not going to get a bunch of money to build more space or to hire more staff. We can't hire the ones we are budgeted for now. So that's going to be the big shift.
I understand, I know as I said, there's a booking fee when a person goes in jail. What happens if they don't have money?
The county jails, many of the counties have booking. There's a lot of fees in the system, booking fees, supervision fees. California, I don't know if you just saw this, but this is one of those, an advocacy. California just made phone calls free for people that are in the system. I mean, that's unbelievable, and something we've pitched here. We would like to move forward a budget proposal on that, but we'll see what kind of traction that gets. But those fees, there is always, and they have to have a sliding fee so that they can be waived if people don't have the dollars. But there are many times when this is where folks get jammed up. They they get stuck in the revenue recapture program. So I didn't pay my probation fees, and now what ends up happening, I get certified, and instead of getting my tax refund next time, they take those fees out of my tax refund. That's where a lot of that stuff is ending up.
I got a phone call from the County Jail because my grandson was in prison. But they called because 2005, I think, they found out, they're calling now, they're looking for him because he has like organs that now will sit there all this time.
Wow.
And they don't know what to do with him. What happens?
Yeah. So we can talk about that one offline because I might be able to help with that one directly. Yeah, we can figure that one out. Yeah. Yeah, it was a question about it was specific to her grandson and some. So we'll get. That one I can help with. I know people that I can get that resolved. Yeah, absolutely. I'll get you my number.
System to go through.
No, I'll give you my cell number. I'll give you my cell. You can call me. Yeah. No, we'll make it easy. Well, again, it's beautiful out there. Enjoy it. Thanks for what you do. If I can be of help, do not hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you. Goodness, wow. We have come to the end of our conference, and as we close, I would like to, first of all, and again, thank St. Joseph's Church for the use of this wonderful space. So if you please give them a round of applause, they'll hear it on the video. Your attendance, your attention, your energy, and your prayers have made this happen. Thank you very much. We hope that you have heard the voice of Jesus. We hope that you have found solace and healing. And I would like to finally ask that God bless us all, and may you each have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thank you very much.